Jan Koum's story begins not in the glowing heart of Silicon Valley, but in a small, unremarkable suburb on the outskirts of Kyiv, Ukraine. During the late 1970s, the Soviet Union was a heavy, gray blanket stretched over daily life where optimism was a quiet, almost rebellious whisper. His family lived in a cramped apartment where the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors' arguments and the kettle's weary whistle. His father was a construction worker, his mother a homemaker, and together they embodied the working-class struggle of that era. Young Jan was a quiet observer, a boy who found solace not in toys or television, both scarce luxuries, but in the mechanics of how things worked. He would take apart old radios, not just to fix them, but to understand the invisible language of electricity and frequency. Even then, there was a spark of something different in him, a need to build systems that brought clarity from chaos. The world outside his window was one of long breadlines and state-sponsored propaganda, where every interaction felt monitored, every conversation a potential risk. This environment planted the first seeds of his later philosophy, a deep, almost primal belief in privacy, simplicity, and direct connection. He learned to read people's real intentions through their silences because spoken words were often masks. His mother would tell him, "A closed mouth catches no flies," a proverb that stuck with him, evolving into a tech mantra about data and security. Childhood for Jan was not a carefree sprint. It was a careful walk through a landscape of scarcity and suspicion. Yet, within that heaviness, he developed a resilience that would later make him unshakable in boardroom battles. He understood early that the most valuable things in life are not flashy or loud, but reliable, private, and functional, like a good winter coat, or a true friend who never repeats your secrets. When Jan Koum was 16 years old, the tectonic plates of his life shifted dramatically. His mother, recognizing that their future in Ukraine offered nothing but more gray skies and economic suffocation, made a heart-wrenching decision to emigrate to the United States. The process was grueling, filled with paperwork, interrogations, and the quiet sale of every possession that couldn't fit into a few suitcases. They left behind extended family, memories, and a homeland that was crumbling into post-Soviet uncertainty. The journey itself was a blur of anxiety and hope, a train to Moscow, a flight to Vienna, and finally, a one-way ticket to Mountain View, California. They arrived with almost nothing, a few $100s, basic English skills, and a refugee status that placed them in a small, government-subsidized apartment. For Jan, America was both a shock and a promise. The sheer abundance of everything, food, lights, noise, was overwhelming. But the reality of poverty followed them across the ocean. His mother worked multiple low-paying jobs, often as a babysitter or a cleaner, while his father, struggling with depression and the loss of his identity, remained in Ukraine. Jan became the man of the house far too young. He enrolled in high school, where his accent and old clothes made him an outsider. He was bullied, ignored, and underestimated. But instead of breaking him, this isolation fueled his focus. He discovered computers and, more specifically, the early internet. In the public library's dusty terminals, he found a world where your past didn't matter, only what you could build. He taught himself computer networking from old manuals discarded by community colleges. He would spend hours after school in the library memorizing code syntax, understanding packet switching, and dreaming of protocols that could connect people without exposing them. His mother would sometimes bring him dinner in a brown bag, and they would eat together on the library steps, two immigrants holding on to a fragile American dream. Those evenings under the California stars were his real education, not just in technology, but in the value of a simple, shared meal after a long day of invisible struggle. The turning point from a struggling immigrant to a tech prodigy came when Jan Koum enrolled at San Jose State University while simultaneously taking a job at Ernst & Young as a security tester. It was a peculiar blend of academic theory and raw, practical hacking. At Ernst & Young, his job was to think like an intruder, to probe systems for weaknesses, to break into digital fortresses before real criminals could. He loved the cat-and-mouse nature of it, the intellectual chess game, but his mind was restless. The university lectures felt slow, tethered to outdated textbooks, while his work was alive with real threats. It was during this period that he first crossed paths with Brian Acton, a veteran engineer at Yahoo. They met through a mutual friend at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, a place where steam and ambition mingled in equal measure. Brian was everything Jan was not at the time: outgoing, gregarious, with an easy laugh and a Rolodex of industry contacts. But they shared a core belief that technology was becoming too noisy, too invasive, too obsessed with surveillance capitalism. Their first conversation lasted 4 hours, covering everything from encrypted protocols to the loneliness of coding at 2 a.m. A friendship was forged not in fire, but in mutual respect for quiet competence. Shortly after, Jan dropped out of San Jose State University, a decision that terrified his mother but felt inevitable to him. He joined Yahoo as an infrastructure engineer, number 44 in the company's early ranks. It was 1998, and Yahoo was a rocket ship. Jan worked on the advertising side, building systems that served billions of banner ads. He learned scale, how to make systems handle millions of concurrent users without crashing, but he hated advertising. To him, ads were the enemy of user experience, a necessary evil that corrupted the purity of communication. He spent his nights at Yahoo after everyone had gone home, quietly working on side projects, experimenting with message queuing systems and lightweight data transfer. He was not a charismatic manager or a flashy presenter. In meetings, he would often stay silent, then send a long, detailed email afterward. Colleagues saw him as eccentric, someone who kept a bag of rice and canned food under his desk, a remnant of his Soviet scarcity mindset. But those who looked closer saw a brilliant, paranoid, beautiful mind. He kept notebooks filled with sketches of user interfaces that had no buttons, no menus, no distractions, just a box for a message and a name. This vision, this obsession with minimalism, would one day become WhatsApp. The idea for WhatsApp was born not in a moment of triumph, but in a deep, painful valley. In January 2009, after nearly a decade at Yahoo, Jan Koum found himself unemployed and uncertain. He had saved money, enough to live on for a year, but the psychological weight of not having a title, a desk, or a mission was crushing. To make matters worse, his relationship with a woman he loved had just ended, leaving him emotionally raw. And then the final blow, a cancer diagnosis for his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to bring him to America. He was alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Clara, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the hum of a single server he used for testing. His birthday came and went, uncelebrated. It was in this state of profound loneliness that he pulled out his brand new iPhone, a device he had bought as a distraction. He noticed an icon on the screen, App Store. He had never built a mobile app before, but something clicked. He realized that the world of instant messaging was broken. Christmas was expensive, controlled by carriers, and insecure. BlackBerry Messenger was locked to one device. I'm an MSN were desktop relics. There was no simple, reliable, private way to just say, I'm thinking of you, or I'm running late, without an account, without an ad, without a profile picture that got scraped for data. He thought about his mother, far away in a hospital, and how he wished he could send her a message that felt like a whisper, not a broadcast. He began coding that night, fueled by cheap coffee and a sense of desperate purpose. He called the app WhatsApp, a playful twist on what's up, because it sounded friendly, casual, and human. The first version was impossibly crude. It could only send status messages like I'm at the gym or can't talk. It had no chat function. He showed it to Brian Acton, who had also just been laid off from Yahoo. Brian tried it and sighed, it's interesting, but nobody cares about statuses. People want to talk to each other. Jan went back to his apartment, deleted half the code, and spent the next 3 weeks building a real-time messaging system. He designed it with no login names, no passwords, just a phone number as the identity. No contacts list to import separately, just your phone's address book. No presence indicators, no last seen or typing bubbles in the first version, just a simple green check mark when the message was delivered. He was building for himself, for his mother, for every lonely immigrant and quiet soul who just wanted to connect without performance. Launching WhatsApp was not a supernova. It was a slow, almost invisible dawn. Jan Koum and Brian Acton funded the initial development with their own savings, refusing venture capital for as long as possible because they feared investors would demand ads, user tracking, and growth hacks that violated their principles. The first version for the iPhone appeared in the App Store in August 2009, and for weeks, only a few dozen people downloaded it. Jan didn't panic. He treated every user like a guest in his home. He personally responded to every support email, often within minutes.